Summer of 1973, Hitsville, USA. Studio A hummed with the familiar tension that came before every major recording session. But this particular afternoon carried something different in the air, something heavier. Two of Motown's biggest stars were about to attempt something that everyone knew was a mistake, but nobody dared to say it out loud. Because when Gordy had an idea about guaranteed money, questioning it wasn't just inadvisable, it was career suicide. Diana Ross sat at the piano, running through scales with the precision of a trained actress preparing for opening night. Every note was perfect, every breath calculated. At 29, she had transformed herself from Florence Ballard's replacement in the Supremes into Motown's undisputed queen. Her solo career was flourishing, her movies were getting greenlit, and her engagement to Gordy had elevated her from performer to royalty. She was no longer just a singer, she was a brand. But brands don't have feelings, and brands don't get to choose their collaborators. The studio door opened, and Marvin Gaye walked in 2 hours late, wearing sunglasses indoors and carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of unprocessed grief on his shoulders. The scent of marijuana clung to his clothes, barely masked by expensive cologne. His movements were deliberate but heavy, like a man walking underwater. Since Tammi Terrell's death in 1970, something fundamental had broken inside him. The effortless chemistry he'd shared with his previous duet partner wasn't just musical, it was spiritual. Tammi had understood his pain, had matched his vulnerability note for note. She had seen past the smooth romantic image Motown had crafted for him and recognized the insecure preacher's son underneath. Their recording sessions had felt like conversations between two wounded souls, each harmony a shared confession. Without her, Marvin felt like half a conversation, incomplete and searching for an echo that would never come. He'd tried recording with other female vocalists over the past 3 years. Each attempt had ended in frustration, the other singers technically proficient but emotionally distant. They sang the notes but couldn't access the place where his music actually lived. The session musicians who'd worked with both Marvin and Tammi could hear the difference. With Tammi, his voice had vulnerability that made even confident performances feel intimate. Now his vocals were guarded, technically perfect, but emotionally armored. He sang like a man who'd learned that opening his heart only led to unbearable loss. Diana looked up from the piano, her expression carefully neutral, professional. "Good afternoon, Marvin." The politeness felt like a wall between them. Diana had perfected the art of emotional distance over years of navigating Motown politics. As a Supreme, she'd learned to smile while Florence Ballard was being pushed out. As a solo artist, she'd learned to appear grateful while fighting for creative control behind closed doors. And as Barry's fiancée, she'd learned to project happiness while feeling increasingly like a beautiful object in his collection rather than a partner. But Marvin's late arrival and obvious indifference triggered something defensive in her. She'd been sitting in this studio for 2 hours, preparing, warming up, doing her professional duty while he wandered Detroit getting high. The disrespect stung more than she wanted to admit. The truth was, Diana had always been slightly intimidated by Marvin's artistry. While she excelled at performance and presentation, Marvin possessed something she desperately wanted but couldn't manufacture: authentic soul. His pain was real, his vulnerability genuine. Her own pain, the loneliness of being Barry's trophy, the exhaustion of constant performance, felt somehow lesser by comparison. She'd watched him with Tammi from a distance, seen the way they connected both musically and personally. That partnership had represented everything Diana craved but had never experienced. Artistic collaboration built on mutual understanding rather than commercial calculation. He nodded without removing his sunglasses, walking directly to his microphone stand. No apology for being late, no small talk, just the practiced distance of someone who'd learned that caring too much always led to loss. "Should we start with the melody line?" Diana's voice was crisp, efficient. She'd done her homework, studied the sheet music Barry had given them, a love song called "You're My Everything," written by the Motown machine specifically for this collaboration. It was tailor-made for romance, for the kind of vocal interplay that sold millions of records and created legendary duet partnerships. But chemistry couldn't be manufactured in a boardroom, and love couldn't be scripted by committee. Marvin adjusted his microphone, his movements careful and deliberate. Let me hear the track first. The engineer, a nervous young man who'd witnessed enough studio meltdowns to recognize the warning signs, hit playback. The instrumental arrangement filled the room, lush and romantic, with string sections that swelled at all the right moments and a bass line that begged for two voices to dance together. It was perfect. It was professional. It was everything Gordy had ordered. Diana began singing the opening verse, her voice sliding effortlessly through the melody like silk over glass. Her technique was flawless, her timing impeccable. But something was missing, the indefinable spark that made great duets transcend their individual parts. When it came time for Marvin to join in the chorus, he closed his eyes and let his voice blend with hers. For 8 bars, it was magic. Their voices merged and separated, intertwined and soared, creating harmonies that sent shivers down the spines of everyone in the control room. For those brief moments, it was everything Gordy had envisioned. Then Diana stopped singing. "We need to discuss the arrangement," she said, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being the star of every session. "The harmony line in the bridge overshadows the melody. I should carry the lead throughout." Marvin opened his eyes, finally removing his sunglasses. Tammi never had a problem with harmony. The words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and suffocating. Diana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The mention of Tammi always did this to her, triggered a complex mixture of jealousy, sympathy, and frustration that she couldn't quite name. She'd never known Tammi well personally, but she'd known about her. Everyone at Motown had known about the brain tumor, the surgeries, the gradual decline, and everyone had watched Marvin slowly die alongside his duet partner. "I'm not Tammi, Marvin, and this isn't 1967. The harshness in her own voice surprised her. She'd meant to sound matter-of-fact, but it came out cruel. Part of her was tired of competing with a ghost, tired of feeling like every woman at Motown was measured against Tammi's memory. Tammi had been sweet, vulnerable, authentic in ways that Diana had never been allowed to be. Diana had been groomed for stardom since adolescence, taught to hide weakness and project perfection. Authenticity was a luxury she'd never been offered. "I know exactly who you are," Marvin replied, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. "And I know exactly what year it is. I know Tammy's been dead for 3 years. I know I'm supposed to be grateful for another chance at a duet partner. I know Barry thinks this is guaranteed money because we're his 2 biggest stars." He paused, looking directly at Diana for the first time since entering the studio. The intensity in his eyes made her want to look away, but she forced herself to maintain contact. "What I don't know is why we're pretending this is going to work." The engineer nervously adjusted levels that didn't need adjusting. The session musicians stared at their instruments. Everyone could feel the session spiraling toward disaster, but nobody knew how to stop it. Diana stood up from the piano bench, her composure beginning to crack. "You think I wanted this? You think I asked Barry to pair me with someone who's still mourning a dead woman 3 years later?" The cruelty of it hit the room like a physical blow. Marvin's face went blank, the kind of emptiness that comes before either breakdown or violence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "Get out!" Marvin's voice was barely above a whisper. "Excuse me?" "I said get out. Find another studio. This is over." Diana's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You can't dismiss me, Marvin. This isn't your session. We're both here because Barry wants us here, and we're both going to finish what we started whether we like each other or not." But Marvin was already walking toward the door. "I don't record with people who speak about Tammi like that. Find yourself another duet partner. Maybe Barry can sing harmony for you." The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the gold records hanging on the walls. Diana stood alone in Studio A, her perfect composure finally cracking. The tears came quietly at first, then in waves that she couldn't control. The session musicians quietly packed their instruments and left, understanding that some moments are too private for witnesses. The engineer stopped the playback and disappeared into the control room, giving Diana space to fall apart without an audience. When Gordy arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by a panicked phone call from the engineer, he found Diana sitting on the piano bench with mascara streaked down her cheeks and Marvin nowhere to be found. "What happened?" Diana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to reconstruct her professional mask. "We're not compatible, musically or otherwise." Barry sat down across from her, his expression unreadable. At 44, he'd built Motown from nothing into a musical empire, and he hadn't done it by accepting failure easily. "You're two of the most talented vocalists I've ever worked with. Compatibility is a luxury. Hit records are necessity." "Then find him another Tammi," Diana said, standing up and gathering her purse. "Because I won't spend another minute being compared to a ghost." Barry caught her arm gently as she moved toward the door. "Diana, sit down." There was something in his voice that made it less request than command. Diana hesitated, then returned to the piano bench. "Marvin's been lost since Tammi died," Barry said quietly. "He hasn't had a real hit duet since then. His solo work is brilliant, but he needs partnership. He needs to remember that music is about connection, not just artistic expression. And what do I need? You need to prove you can work with anyone, that you're not just a solo act or a group member, but a complete artist who can adapt to any situation." Diana studied Barry's face, reading the subtext beneath his words. This wasn't just about making a hit record. This was about power dynamics within the Motown family, about proving loyalty, about maintaining the careful balance that kept Barry's empire functioning. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing yet, but I'm going to offer him the same choice I'm offering you. Make this record or find somewhere else to make records." The ultimatum hung between them like a loaded gun. Diana understood the game being played. She'd been playing it since she was 16 years old, navigating the politics of the Supremes, then the transition to solo stardom, then her relationship with Barry himself. Everything at Motown was about leverage, and right now she had very little. "And if we make a terrible record, then we learn from it and move on. But if you don't try, there won't be a next record to worry about." That evening, Marvin sat in his study at home, staring at a photograph of Tammi Terrell that he kept on his desk. In the picture, she was laughing at something he'd said during a photo shoot, her head tilted back with joy. It had been taken just months before her collapse, when she was still healthy and vibrant and unaware of the tumor growing in her brain. The phone had been ringing for hours, Barry, his manager, his producer, all trying to convince him to return to the studio tomorrow and finish what he'd started with Diana. But every time he closed his eyes, he heard Diana's voice saying those words about Tammi, dismissing 3 years of love and partnership like it was nothing more than career baggage. Anna found him there at midnight, still staring at the photograph. She'd been watching him spiral for 3 years, helpless to compete with a memory. Their marriage had always been complicated, built more on mutual convenience than passion, but Tammy's death had introduced a new element, the painful awareness that Marvin was capable of a depth of feeling that he'd never shown Anna. "You have to go back," she said simply. Marvin didn't look up. "I can't sing with someone who doesn't understand what Tammi meant." Anna sat down in the chair across from his desk, studying her husband's profile in the dim lamplight. After 11 years of marriage, she understood the geography of his pain better than he realized. "Diana understands perfectly. That's why she's threatened." He finally turned to face his wife, confusion flickering across his features. "Threatened by what?" "By the fact that you love Tammi in a way you've never loved anyone else, including me." The honesty of it was devastating and liberating at the same time. Anna had spent years pretending not to notice the way Marvin's voice changed when he spoke about Tammi, the way his eyes softened when he remembered their recording sessions. She'd watched him grieve with an intensity that their own relationship had never inspired, and she'd finally reached the point where acknowledging the truth hurt less than pretending it didn't exist. Their marriage had been strategic from the beginning, a union that benefited both families within the Motown hierarchy. Anna was Barry's sister, which gave Marvin protection and influence. Marvin was a rising star, which elevated Anna's status. But love, real, consuming, soul-deep love, that had been reserved for someone else. "So what do I do?" "You go back to that studio and you sing, not because Diana deserves it and not because Barry demands it, but because Tammi would want you to keep making music. She wouldn't want her death to be the end of your ability to connect with other artists." The next morning, both Marvin and Diana arrived at Studio A on time. Neither apologized for the previous day's blow-up, Neither pretended to be happy about the situation. They simply took their places at their respective microphones and waited for direction. The engineer hit playback on You're My Everything once again. This time they sang the entire song without stopping. Their voices blended perfectly, creating harmonies that were technically flawless and emotionally hollow. It was the most beautiful, soulless music anyone in that room had ever heard. They completed the session in 3 hours, recording not just the lead vocal, but alternate takes and harmonies. When finished, Diana left without goodbye. Marvin listened to playback once, nodded approval, and walked out. The record was never released. Years later, when music journalists would ask Gordy about the lost Diana Ross and Marvin Gaye duet, he would smile diplomatically and claim that the timing wasn't right for such a collaboration. But everyone who was in Studio A that week understood the real truth. Some partnerships are about more than vocal compatibility and commercial potential. Some collaborations require a level of vulnerability and trust that can't be manufactured or mandated. And sometimes the most talented artists in the world simply aren't meant to make music together. The master tapes of You're My Everything remain in Motown's archives, a testament to what happens when business decisions try to override artistic chemistry. It's perfect and lifeless, a technical achievement that captures everything about Diana and Marvin's respective talents while revealing nothing about their souls. In the end, Gordy learned that even he couldn't force lightning to strike twice. Marvin's magic with Tammi had been lightning. What happened with Diana was just expensive thunder, loud and impressive, but ultimately powerless to move anyone who heard it. Marvin never attempted another duet partnership. Diana continued her solo career, eventually leaving Motown entirely. And somewhere in a vault in Detroit, their voices remain frozen together in perpetuity, singing about being everything to each other while meaning absolutely nothing at all.